and journalism. Let's start in June of 1958 with the very first copy of The Realist. When Paul Krasner started this monthly publication, his stated purpose was the reporting and analysis of timely and significant conflicts that are ignored or treated only superficially by the general press, and to provide satirical commentary on the tragicomic currents of our. Right out of the gate, Krasner was mixing humor and cultural analysis as a critique of mainstream journalism, which was still a work in progress. Television news was about a decade old at that point, joining print and radio. In that first issue, there was an earnest examination of the concept of mixed religion marriage in the American melting pot, also a column treating witch hunting like a sport and giving readers advice on how to play it, and also cartoons and existential nursery rhymes. Krasner published The Realist consistently until the 70s and would bring it back from time to time until 2001. He wrote books and self-published frequently, but he was also involved in street theater and live performances. He was one of Ken Casey's Merry Pranksters and a Yippie, and would release stand-up albums. And when I spoke with him in 2002, he said, "I consider myself an investigative satirist because I do research on what's going on in order to understand it or to give facts. And what happens is sometimes the audience laughs at the setup. They think you're making it up. It becomes more and more of a challenge to extend the truth." Laughter was essential to Krasner. In that first issue of The Realist, he made the important declaration that he was not a despiser. He said, "On one level, laughter is an antidote to fear, and it's also a way of making a point without lecturing people, because people don't like to be lectured to. But if they laugh at something, if they laugh at it intuitively, it means that for that moment, they've accepted the truth that they might have rejected otherwise because their defenses are down." And while he declared himself nonpartisan, Krasner nonetheless felt that laughter was a key weapon against autocracy. He says, "I think the more repression there is, the more need there is for irreverence towards the authority that applies that repression." Comedy and journalism both grew after the 50s. Comedy became more politically and socially evolved, with stand-ups like Mort Saul, Lenny Bruce, and Dick Gregory. TV and image became increasingly important in the 1960 debates between Kennedy and Nixon. That became a flashpoint for TV when a polished Kennedy made a favorable impression over the dyspeptic Nixon. Things got looser in the 60s for comedy. Richard Pryor, George Carlin, and Lily Tomlin were emerging with more thoughtful work. Laughter was a way to combat an establishment that took itself way too seriously. Nixon may have hated the Smothers Brothers, but he knew he had to look hip and seem like he had a sense of humor about himself. So he went on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In 1968 to intone their catchphrase, "Sock it to me." Alternative news weeklies started to pop up in the 60s and 70s in the vein of New York's Village Voice, which was founded in 55. Other scenes started in LA in 67. Boston After Dark, the forerunner to the dearly departed Boston Phoenix, started in 1966. More came in the 70s and 80s, rising during America's comedy boom in the 80s and proliferating in tandem with dedicated comedy clubs. One of the Phoenix's contributors was Boston satirist Barry Crimmins. Crimmins hit a bit harder than most political comics. He could be brutal enough to survive in the clubs and smart enough to cite specific congressional bill numbers for the policies he was criticizing. An earlier line of his was, "People say if you don't love this country, why don't you leave it? I say because I don't want to be victimized by its foreign policy." He called the mainstream media the house organ for the corporate interest in one interview I did with him. He said they're brave when they're out covering wars and stuff, but they're scared to death to not be able to pay their mortgage. Howard Zinn was a friend of Crimmins and provided the intro to his 1991 album, Kill the Messenger. In an interview with Zinn before he and Crimmins appeared at a fundraiser together in 2002, Zinn said, "What distinguishes Barry is that he's bolder than anybody else politically. He's just way out there. And that's very courageous, considering that his career undoubtedly and his bankroll has undoubtedly suffered because of it." From the Gulf War on and through 9/11, television news became even more prominent, and the news cycle ramped up to a constant assault of images and sound bites, which brings us to Jon Stewart and The Daily Show. The Daily Show was always a parody of self-important television news, its clueless correspondence, and strange storytelling. When Stewart took over in '99, the focus got a little bit sharper. Stewart was always trying to balance the silly with more pointed acts. Our show is not one thing, he told me in one interview. There are days when the show's just pure out and out silliness, having nothing to do with anything. We get some footage of elephants playing the drums, and that becomes the basis for the third act. He was disappointed in the gimmickry TV news employed to get viewers. It's very hard to watch the news co-opt the values of, say, Fear Factor, he said. That's just uncomfortable. At one point during the interview, he mentioned that if you had been watching The Daily Show and CNN on election night, you were probably getting the same set of facts. But he was wary of the idea of being an actual news source. If you're wondering if we have a point of view, yeah, I think we do. Is it a consistent one? Probably not. I mean, but if the whole show is baseless, it wouldn't be that interesting to watch. We do have some shows now that strive to present research stories along with the funny. John Oliver's Last Week Tonight comes to mind. But we are seeing the push and pull now when satire is bankrolled by corporations that are subject to the whims of whoever is in political power. You saw it when The Late Show with Stephen Colbert was canceled, or when criticism of Donald Trump got Jimmy Kimmel taken off the air, and it took customer protests to get him back. Comedy and the news are all part of a system of checks and balances on information. When comedy has a political or social bent, it is supposed to be critical of received wisdom. Journalism is supposed to work in a similar manner. People seem to trust you more if you can make them smile a little, and the news now more than ever has to entertain. And if you're a comedian and you want to seem in touch, you cover the news. If you are a news outlet that needs eyeballs, you entertain. It's a tricky business walking that line, and it's not getting any easier when people get their news from TikTok. The way to quell bad information isn't a mere aggregate of more voices covering the news. It has to be more conscientious voices, and increasingly those voices have to police their own standards. And that's where I petered out writing this last night. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. All right, we got our headliner, everybody, and then some house cleaning, and some in-house stuff, but exciting. So this next this is one of the few comics who we ever put on the cover of the Dig in my run there, and that's not just because she's funny. She's tenacious, and we knew from early on in her career she had the gusto to endure the long haul. I'll also say that one of the reasons we picked her for this is her affinity for all things. Alt media, 100 times. So I gotta. This is for Cher when she comes out. This is original Hunter Thompson Rolling Stone from 1970. Thank you. Without any further, this is Sherilyn, everybody.
I was happy when Dennis fixed this because I'm shorter and I was having anxiety about it. So, all right. No worries. I think you're right. Okay. Good afternoon.